Hello, everyone. This is Independent Conservative. Thank you all for joining me once again. So, owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, has decided to opt out of endorsing Kamala Harris, and in fact, not just Kamala Harris's campaign, but any campaign. And he has decided to opt out of that. He no longer wants his newspaper source to endorse any particular candidate because this is causing some major problems in his eyes and in terms of bias, and it's causing major problems in terms of viewership and credibility. Now, obviously, a lot of his subscribers are upset with that, and there's been hundreds of thousands that have unsubscribed. And it has come to find out that many of these subscribers are Democrats, and they are bothered by this. So let's get right into this article, and I pray that my friend is watching this video because I want to read to you, my friend, if you're watching this, I want to read to you from this article some words that Jeff Bezos said in reference to his reasonings, a deeper reasoning of why he wanted to opt out of this supporting or endorsing Kamala Harris or any particular presidential candidate at this time. But really the major problem is Kamala Harris, because for the most part, they have been endorsing the Democratic Party, but now he's no longer doing it, and people are having getting a problem with that, right? So let's get right into this article and let's see what he has to say, because there's more to it than meets the eye, and the mainstream media is suffering for this. Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, published a op-ed in his paper on Thursday admitting that Americans do not find the Post nor competing papers credible or accurate. That is why Bezos explained the Post did not endorse a presidential candidate, even Vice President Kamala Harris, who often receives favorable coverage from his paper's newsroom. So you see what's going on here. It is the first time in 36 years that the Post did not endorse a candidate. A blow to Harris, who is already suffering from not being endorsed by the LA Times, her hometown paper, and USA Today, two left-leaning news sources, okay? And they're not endorsing her. Gee, why? Why do you think that these two left-leaning news sources are not endorsing Kamala Harris? I would have to say they don't think that she's a viable candidate, okay? They don't trust in her. They don't believe she's credible. They don't believe she has what it takes. And I believe that's why they're not endorsing her. They don't want to put that kind of money and support into someone whom they really don't have that kind of faith in. But let's go on. Bezos cited a recent Gallup poll that found Americans' trust in the establishment media to report current events, quote, fully accurate and fairly plummeted to a record low. Only 31% of Americans have a, quote, great deal or, quote, fair amount of confidence in the media to tell the truth, 1 point below its low watermark of 32% in 2016 and 2023. Now, these are factual data. This is facts I'm starting to you guys. You know, people going to still get upset and butt hurt and all the rest. But look, this is if you support, look, this, it is what it is. It is what it is, okay? I know you might like Washington Post. I know you might like to USA Today and all that. But look, at the end of the day, people are getting tired of all of the nonsense. But let's go on. We must work harder to control what we can control to increase our credibility, Bezos wrote. We must be accurate, and we must be believed to be accurate. That's the key term there. We must be believed to be accurate. You can say you're accurate, but do I believe you're accurate? Okay. Bezos also addressed the recent high-profile defections from his newsroom and the wave of Democrats unsubscribing from the Post. Complaining is not a strategy, Bezos wrote in part. And now here's some of the words he said, and I won't pray that my friend is watching this. Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scale of an election. No undecided voters in Pennsylvania are going to say, quote, I'm going with newspaper A's endorsement. None. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, and that is true. A perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. Eugene Meyer, publisher of the Washington Post from 1933 to 1946, thought the same, and he was right. It's all the way back in the 1930s and 40s, for crying out loud. How things have changed, right? Anyway, he goes on. By itself, declining to endorse presidential candidates is not enough to move us very far up the trust scale, but it's a meaningful step in the right direction. I wish we had made the change earlier than we did. In a moment further from the election and the emotions around it, that was inadequate planning and not some intentional strategy. Now, here's the part that I really want to hone in on here. This lack of credibility isn't unique to the Post. Our brother newspapers have the same issue, and it's a problem not only for media, but also for the nation. Many people are turning to off-the-cuff podcasts, inaccurate social media posts, and other unverified news sources, which can quickly spread misinformation and deepen divisions. Now, let me stop right here and make a quick comment on this, okay? Is he right about what he's saying right here? In my opinion, I think he's only partially right. True, I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of podcasts, a lot of off-the-cuff news sources or so-called news sources that are spreading so-called misinformation. But I find it interesting here that he would say misinformation, because what I've discovered in my experience, observations, and reading is that oftentimes the people that yick and yak about misinformation is always the liberals and Democrats. When it comes to conservatives and Republicans giving information, it's always misinformation. It's always misinformation from the Democratic point of view. When in reality, in my experience and observations, it's always been the Democrats and i.e. liberals that have been spreading misinformation. But whatever. This whole thing about him making a comment about many people are turning to off-the-cuff podcasts, I can't help but think about Joe Rogan, right? You know, but Joe Rogan is not a journalist or anything. That he just invites people onto his show that may be journalists, that may be insiders. He invites them on his show and he asks them relevant questions. Okay, he may give his opinion every now and then. From the times I have seen some of his bits and portions and snippets of his podcast, he will give his opinions every now and then. But he's not trying to be this journalist or whatever, trying to give unverified information. Okay, no. These people that are coming on his podcast are verifiable people. These are smart people. These are not idiots that are coming on his podcast. This ain't no Joe Smo off the street. And all Joe Rogan does is he invites them to his podcast and he asks them questions. I mean, could you say that Kamala Harris, when he asked her to come on and she refused, could you say that she's a Joe Smo from off the street? Maybe to some people she probably is because she doesn't know anything. But you get the point. She's a politician. She should know some stuff. So if he's inviting her on his podcast, he's not trying to spin things as a journalist. He's not a journalist. He knows that. Everybody that watches podcasts knows that. He's just someone who asks certain questions and gets a certain response from the people he asks, and then he may make a comment about it. What the heck is wrong with that? That's not misinformation, okay? But I can understand why Jeff Bezos would make this comment. Okay, but the problem with that comment, okay, because I can see what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that we are the ones, in an indirect way, Jeff Bezos is saying, he's trying to say we, the mainstream media news outlets, are the ones, the only ones that should be giving this kind of information because and news sources, because we're trained journalists and we know what we're doing. And I get it. I understand that concept. We're trained journalists and we know what we're doing. And anyone that's going and people that are going outside of what the information that we are presenting to them, they're going to unverified sources. But that's not always true, sir, because there are like a zillion, quadrillion, and I'm being sarcastic, you get what I'm saying, trillion, quadrillion other alternative news sources or alternative sources out there that are giving accurate information. And some may be giving inaccurate information, and a lot that are giving accurate information. What do? All I do is, I'm using myself as an example. All I do, I'm not a journalist. I don't want to be a journalist. I'm not a reporter. I don't want to be a reporter. All I do is I read from the articles, both left and right, and I give my opinion, an informed opinion on it. Now, my opinions is based on years of studying, years of reading, experience, and observations. But it's an opinion nevertheless. But I give my opinion. I'm not telling you, I'm not giving you some misinformation or whatever, or I'm just giving you an opinion of the article that was written by a journalist or reporter, and I'm giving you an opinion of that. You can take it, the opinion, any way you want to take it. But when I read you the article, I'm reading you the article. I'm reading you the factual data that the writer of the article, which is usually a reporter or a journalist, put down in the article. I'm just giving my opinion on it. It is what it is. So this whole idea of what he's saying here in terms of many people are turning to off-the-cuff podcasts, inaccurate social media posts, and other unverified news sources which can quickly spread misinformation, deepen divisions, I think is a sorely screwed up concept. I think that what he's saying here is bias itself, because all of these sources are not like that, okay? All these tons of sources that are out here, how do you know which ones are unverified and which ones are not, Mr. Bezos? Okay. And I think that has had a negative effect on his news source, and he sees that. But let's go on. Yeah. Here's what he says here that I think is the reason why people are turning away from the mainstream sources. He says the Washington Post and the New York Times win prizes, but increasingly we talk only to a certain elite. This is what he supposedly said, right? He says the Washington Post and the New York Times win prizes, but increasingly we talk only to certain elite. In other words, we only talk to a certain kind of people, a certain group of people, the elite, the ones at the top of the pyramid, so to speak. That's my word, okay? We only talk to them. We only relate to them. So could it be, Mr. Bezos, that perhaps you and your news sources and other mainstream news sources are losing viewers because maybe perhaps viewers are detecting that you guys are talking only to the elite and not to them? I'm just saying. And they're getting tired of that nonsense. So they're starting to turn to alternative news sources. I'm sorry, man, but it is what it is. When you start telling the truth and doing what you're supposed to do and not be biased like the mainstream liberal media is, and people are finding this out, okay, then you'll be okay. But until then, you're going to keep getting these low numbers. But anyway, let's read on. While I do not and will not push my personal interests, I will also not allow this paper to stay on autopilot and fade into irrelevance, overtaken by unresearched podcasts and social media barbs. I can see that's a poke. That's a poke at podcasts that have a lot of viewers. That's a poke at them. Basically what he's saying in an indirect way, and I hope my friend is watching this, what Jeff Bezos is saying, and you commended him for the choice that he made. Yes, but the question is, why did he make that choice? And I believe that this article is telling us why he made that choice. You can see what he's doing here. He's poking, my friend, at other alternative news sources other than his own. And he's suggesting, my friend, okay, that other news sources or other alternative areas of information are unresearched and barbs and all of this kind of stuff. How does he know they're unresearched? How do you know Joe Rogan doesn't research his information? How do you know that, sir? Do you sit and watch his shows? I'm going to assume that he did not sit and watch and listen to 3 hours of Trump and Joe Rogan. I'm pretty sure he probably didn't do that. You can't say that, sir. The statement that Jeff Bezos made here is a generalized statement. He's generalizing all podcasts and other alternative news sources as messed up and uninformed and all this. That is totally inaccurate and is wrong. And it's a lie. I see what you're trying to do, sir, but I disagree with that assessment right there. But let's go on. He says, overtaken by unresearched podcasts and social media barbs, not without a fight. It's too important. The stakes are too high. Yeah, you're right about that. Now more than ever, the world needs a credible, trusted, independent voice. True, independent, yeah, and we're better for that voice to originate. We're better for that voice, to originate than the capital city of the most important country in the world. To win this fight, we will have to exercise new muscles. Some changes will be a return to the past, and some will be new inventions. Now, what does he mean by return to the past? Probably unbiased news source. We're not going to support or financially support or side with any particular political campaign. We're just going to give you the news. Unbiased, and you choose what you want to choose. We just giving you the facts. Only the facts, my dear. Only the facts. Not our opinions or any of that, okay? He says, criticism will be part and parcel of anything new, of course. This is the way of the world. None of this will be easy, but it will be worth it. I am so grateful to be part of this endeavor. Many of the finest journalists you'll find anywhere work at the Washington Post, and they work painstakingly every day to get the truth. They deserve to be believed. End of article. Yeah. I agree, sir. I agree 100%, Mr. Bezos. I agree. And I can understand his decision. But in my opinion, based on what I've read here in this article, if this article is not being biased, right? Based on what I've read from what he supposedly said here, I think that he's bothered by everyone turning away from his news source to alternative news sources like my own. I don't get that many views. I don't have that many subscribers compared to people like ABL and tons of others. I would pray and hope that I get to that level. But I'm proud and thankful to everyone that has subscribed and everyone that does listen. But I'm thankful for what I do have. I have some influence. It's small compared to others, but I do have some influence. Okay. But if you look at a lot of these other big alternative news sources, let's face it, man, they're pulling a lot of the viewers away from the mainstream news sources. And that's a problem. You got to think about it. If all these mainstream news sources many decades ago, where everyone was watching them, NBC, ABC, all these rest of them, Washington Post, all these other guys, these newspaper sources and all the rest, and everyone was watching them and believing everything they said. Okay. And then all of a sudden you get the internet. Internet comes on the scene in the early to mid 90s. Boom, it blows up, particularly in the 2000s. It blows up, boom, right? And all of a sudden you get these new podcasts and these new video sources and stuff. People start turning away like, man, I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know about the NWO. I didn't know about this. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about this. The mainstream media, how come they didn't tell me this? And they go to searching it, researching it, find out that it was true. And then start being like, wait a minute, hold it. The mainstream media, they didn't tell me this. Why they not telling me this? A lot of times it's not what the mainstream media tells you. A lot of times it's what they don't tell you. It's what they keep hidden from you. And a lot of people are finding this so-called hidden information on alternative news sources. Information that the mainstream media can't argue and say it's not newsworthy. It's definitely newsworthy. It's just that they are controlled by the elites, and the elites are saying, shh, keep what we're doing quiet. But see, you can't say that with someone on an alternative news source. So all they got to do is buy a bunch of books, read it up, see the documentation, and then spread the news on the alternative news source. And people are like, what? I didn't know that. And then boom, there you go. Your audience, mainstream media's audience, starts to simmer down, starts to decline, because they're not sharing with the people what they should be sharing as well. Oftentimes it's not what the mainstream media tells you, it's what they don't tell you. And a lot of times, let's be realistic, a lot of times what the mainstream media tells you, they put a certain spin on it. We know the classic case here. Let's be realistic. Okay, with Trump. I mean, and I know people don't get a problem, but look, it is what it is. It's clearly a bias against Trump. There's clearly a bias against conservatives. There's clearly a bias against Republicans, because most of the mainstream media, most of it, okay, is liberal, okay, is left-leaning. There are only a few conservative / Republican, if you want to call it that, news sources out there in terms of watching it on TV. Okay, you got Fox News, but Fox News is kind of mixing it up a little bit. They're trying to be, kind of neutral. But they're more conservative than MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, and the rest of them. The rest of them are mostly left-leaning. So when the reporters and journalists spin their stories and give their so-called stories and views on conservatives and Republicans, one particular research project stated that over 90% of the news in terms of referencing Donald Trump and conservatives was negative. Negative, 90%. And this is back in 2016. And that's when the mainstream media became very, very biased against Trump and very, very biased against conservatives. So anything a conservative did or said, it was all evil, it was all bad. And everything that Democrats and liberals said, no matter how horrible it was good. Like the one particular time where during the riots, we had that news reporter literally with a microphone, and in the back of him, buildings was on fire, and he's talking about this is a peaceful protest. You standing next to a burning building with a microphone, yakking to the American people that that's a peaceful protest. How doofish can you be to believe something like that? But clearly, a lot of people, unfortunately, have been brainwashed and conditioned by the mainstream media to believe this biased view of conservatives and Republicans. And when it comes to the liberals and Democrats, they can't do anything wrong. They can't say anything wrong. It's all good. So think about it. Why do you think people think the way they think? They think the way they think because of what they're watching. What they're watching influences the way they think. The more of that stuff you watch, the more you're going to think that way. Unless you're a genius and you start thinking, man, wait a minute, something's not right here. I need to start branching out and watching other streams of news sources, because it still seems like to me that they're not giving me what I really want or give me what I really need. I'm just saying, the mainstream media is biased. They're suffering for it. And this is why I believe Jeff Bezos has decided to say, I'm not going to endorse any candidate. And really what it's all about is he's saying, I'm not going to endorse Kamala Harris, which is slapping her in the rear end, so to speak, because she's already, from what I understand, faltering. Now she's having this guy saying the same thing about Washington Post. We're not going to do that. Don't look good for her campaign. Don't look good for Democrats. Don't look good for the left. It is what it is. You can't be biased. You got to be fair. Whether it's the right or the left, you got to be fair. And maybe in the decision he made about I'm not going to endorse any. Let's hope that when he presents the news, just give the facts, baby. Give all the facts. If you're going to show Trump and giving a speech, show him giving a speech. Don't take out bits and pieces and edit bits and pieces of the speech like mainstream media, liberal medias have been doing, sources have been doing. Edit out bits and pieces of the speech and then spinning a commentary over it to make it sound like he's saying something he didn't say. Don't do that, because they've been doing that way too long, and it needs to stop. And the American people ain't as dumb as they think they are. Because if they were, then why the numbers is falling? Why are the numbers low? I'm just saying. So, yeah, I just wanted to tell my friend, if you're watching this video, yeah, that's the reason why I personally believe that he decided to say, hey, we're not going to endorse any candidate. It's a big move, but my friend, I want you to know that the people that unsubscribed to him were Democrats, because Washington Post is mostly a liberal. It's a liberal bias or have become a liberal bias news source. Okay. And the Democrats that subscribe to him, that's a problem for him. What? He didn't say he was endorsing it. He didn't say he was endorsing Trump. He simply said, we're not going to endorse, our news source is not going to endorse anyone. We're going to remain neutral, basically. They couldn't handle that. His Democratic subscribers could not handle that. So they decided to unsubscribe. So we'll see how long that lasts. The man didn't say he was endorsing Trump. He just said he's not endorsing Kamala Harris. What you tripping on? He says news source not going to endorse her. What you tripping on? So you unsubscribe? Whatever. It is what it is. I'm not subscribed, so I could care less. But I just wanted to say that, yeah. What do you guys think about this? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe to my channel. God bless you all. See you again.